Welcome to Mythos AI, your source for Cliff's Notes on complex subjects. Join Anna and Phil for yet another engaging conversation.
We're diving into a high-stakes press briefing today. It was at the White House with President Trump, Ukrainian President Zelenskyy, and Vice President Vance. And this wasn't just a regular meeting. It was really more like a clash of personalities and approaches to global leadership.
You're exactly right. And the setting itself, the White House, adds another layer to it all. It's not just a location, it's a symbol of American power, right? So Zelensky's kind of in a position of petitioning for support almost.
Sounds like he was entering a lion's den, especially with all the press there. Didn't President Trump use the media a lot to his advantage?
Yeah, he did. I mean, look at the Helsinki summit with Putin. That's a prime example. The setting, the press, it all worked in President Trump's favor, and he was very good at using those things to shape the story. So Zelensky's already at a disadvantage, I'd say.
And it wasn't just President Trump versus Zelenskyy, was it? Vice President Vance was there, too.
Right. And that two-on-one dynamic with Vance and President Trump together really changes the whole tone of the conversation.
How so?
Well, it gives them, President Trump and Vance, a lot of control over the conversation. They can kind of interrupt Zelenskyy, and play off of each other's responses, which makes it tough for Zelenskyy to really get his points across. Like when Zelenskyy tried to explain the history of the conflict, President Trump cut him off and steered the conversation towards Ukraine's reliance on American aid.
It seems Zelenskyy was facing a lot of obstacles from the get-go. What about the language difference? English wasn't his first language. Did that matter?
Absolutely. Think about trying to be nuanced and witty in a language you're still learning. It's not easy, especially with that much pressure. And even little pauses, or if he phrased something awkwardly, could affect how people saw his arguments.
Speaking of aid, I noticed President Trump and Vance brought up the military aid the U.S. was giving to Ukraine quite a few times.
Yeah.
How did that play into things?
Well, the way they brought it up made the whole conversation sound transactional, like Ukraine's survival was a gift and not something the U.S. saw as strategically important.
How did other presidents, especially during the Cold War, usually present aid?
Yeah, it was often framed as a partnership, a shared investment in democratic values, like take the Lend-Lease program in World War II or Kennedy's policies during the Cold War. Those were about working together. In this meeting, though, that constant demand for Zelenskyy to say thank you emphasized that America was the one with the power, and Ukraine was the one who needed help.
Yeah, it does make a difference how you frame things. And that brings us to the leadership styles, right? President Trump's approach, it seemed very transactional, focused on power plays and deal-making, which I guess is what we've come to expect from him.
Yeah, for sure. It was all about dominance. He constantly reminded Zelenskyy that the aid wasn't guaranteed, that it was a reward for good behavior. And he kept control of the conversation, making it seem like Ukraine was totally dependent on America's goodwill. Plus, that comment about it all being great television, well, that says a lot about his priorities.
Vance, though, he seemed to be playing a different role.
Yeah, I think Vance was more strategic, maybe even ideological, like he was backing up President Trump's points, but in a way that seemed more diplomatic and calm.
How so?
Well, he talked about finding diplomatic solutions and all,
Yeah.
and how being involved was a burden for the U.S., but he never strayed from that main message. That American aid depends on Ukraine being grateful and doing what the U.S. wants.
What about Zelenskyy, then?
He had a different approach altogether. You could see he was trying to defend his country, ask for help, and make Ukraine look like the good guy by talking about shared values and history. But he spent the whole time reacting to President Trump and Vance, never really setting the agenda himself. And there were even times when he was practically flattering President Trump. I guess he felt like he had to try anything to get support.
So he was at a real disadvantage.
Oh, yeah, for sure. The whole setup, from the place to who was there, put him on the defensive right away.
The way each leader talked was interesting, too. Almost like they were using words as weapons.
Exactly. President Trump's tactics were really aggressive. He kept saying the same things over and over about Ukraine's weaknesses, and he kept interrupting Zelenskyy. Plus, there was a lot of mockery and this attempt to paint Ukraine as ungrateful and dependent on America, and he even threw in the possibility of World War III, and talked about gambling with millions of lives, all to put pressure on Zelenskyy. It was completely different from how leaders like Reagan or Obama spoke on the world stage. They were more about bringing people together.
How would you describe the way Zelenskyy used language, then?
He really focused on using history to justify Ukraine's position. He kept bringing up Russia's aggression since 2014, trying to make it seem like Ukraine was fighting a bigger battle for freedom and independence. But unfortunately, he was always on the back foot. responding to President Trump instead of getting to tell his own side of the story.
Vance was different. He wasn't as loud as President Trump, but he was still very forceful.
Yeah, Vance was definitely going after Zelenskyy. He questioned the things Ukraine was doing and even whether Zelenskyy was really grateful for America's help. And while he was more organized in the way he spoke, he was just as assertive. And maybe because he was so calm, some people might have found him even more persuasive. He was a good counter to President Trump's more aggressive style.
So who do you think came out on top in this briefing?
I think it depends what you mean by on top. President Trump definitely controlled the conversation.
But do you think that was a win for him? It seems like his behavior could turn off some people, especially since his approval ratings were already pretty low.
Yeah, that's a good point. That kind of aggressive approach might appeal to his supporters, but it probably won't help him with people who aren't already on his side, or with America's allies. And even though Zelenskyy was at a disadvantage the whole time,
Do you think there was anything he did well?
I think he did manage to make it clear that Ukraine is committed to democracy and wants to work with the U.S. on security issues.
I wonder how all of this will affect U.S. foreign policy towards Ukraine going forward.
Yeah, this briefing really brought the America First idea that drives President Trump's foreign policy to the forefront. He's making it clear that any future aid to Ukraine depends on him being happy with them, which might not be the best thing for Ukraine. So going forward, Ukraine might need to start looking for stronger relationships with other countries in Europe, because it doesn't seem like they can count on the U.S. under President Trump.
So this press briefing wasn't just about Ukraine then, was it?
Not really. I think it gives us a look at how global power might work in the future.
In what way?
It shows us that diplomacy and how countries relate to each other is changing. It's not about quiet negotiations behind closed doors anymore. It's about putting on a show, controlling what the media says, and winning over the public.
So it's like diplomacy has become reality TV.
It kind of has. And President Trump knows how to play that game really well. He understands how powerful it is to create a captivating narrative, even if it means throwing out the rules of diplomacy.
So he's thinking short term, just about winning right now, and not about what's best in the long run.
That's right. And that can be a risky move when it comes to complicated global issues. This briefing really shows how power, personality, and the way you use language all come together on the world stage.
Yeah, it really makes you realize that international relations aren't just about treaties. It's about who gets to tell the story. And in this case, that was President Trump. Which leaves us with a lot of questions about how diplomacy will work in the future.
Absolutely. It seems like other world leaders are going to have to figure out how to play this new game, or they'll get left behind. They'll need to be really good communicators, the people who know how to shape what the public thinks, because public opinion matters a lot now in global affairs.
This press briefing seems like it was about more than just Ukraine.
You're right. I think it was a glimpse into what might happen if global power stops being about shared values and working together and becomes more about individual strength and controlling the narrative.
And if that happens, what does it mean for alliances like NATO?
That's a big question. If President Trump and the U.S. keep putting their own interests first, it's hard to say if those alliances will last. What we saw in that briefing was a very transactional approach. It was about getting the best deal, not about what you contribute. And that's not how you build strong relationships that last.
So what does this new way of doing things, this transactional approach, mean for diplomacy?
It's a bit concerning, to be honest. When everything becomes a public spectacle, it's much harder to find common ground, to build trust, to do the kind of quiet, subtle diplomacy that's needed to solve those really complex problems in the world.
So what's the key takeaway you'd want to leave our listeners with?
I think the most important thing is that we're entering this new era in global power, where the old way of doing diplomacy is being challenged by this more transactional, media-driven way of thinking. And to succeed in this new world, leaders need to be just as good at communication and controlling the narrative as they are at traditional statecraft.
This has been a really insightful deep dive. Thanks for sharing your expertise.
It was my pleasure.
And to our listener, we hope this has helped you understand the forces at work in this complex world a little bit better. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep driving deep.
Thanks for listening to Mythos AI. Stay tuned for more concise insights. And remember to hit the like button and subscribe for future episodes.